It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you, sir?
Good. You always make that sound so important.
It is important. You're the foreign editor.
Yeah, right. Glad to be here as ever.
All right. What, it's not important to be the
No,
foreign
it's
editor?
important.
Okay.
The whole show is important. Everything is important.
Okay. We're going to talk about important matters with Gregory Viscusi, journalist at Bloomberg News. They let you out of the office.
They did.
And you were in Italy covering the elections. We'll talk about that in a little while. Alexis Poulain, co-founder of the digital magazine The Modern World.
Yes, it is.
And who's also been writing about Italy. More on that in a moment. And Gérald Olivier, columnist at Atlantico.fr. Nice to see you.
Nice to be here again.
The World This Week on Facebook and on Twitter, #World This Week. It was South Korea's national security advisor who made the announcement from Washington.
Expressed his eagerness to meet President Trump as soon as possible. President Trump appreciated the briefing and said he would meet Kim Jong-un by May to achieve permanent denuclearization.
Yeah, so this meeting to take place at some point before the end of May. No venue as such set for now. Still a lot of negotiating to come. The surprise coming not from Pyongyang for offering the meeting, but more from the Americans for accepting it. Here's what Donald Trump tweeted. Kim Jong-un talked about denuclearization, not just a freeze. Also, no missile testing by North Korea during this period of time. Great progress being made, but sanctions will remain until an agreement is reached. Meeting being planned. Exclamation point. Gérald Olivier, were you surprised?
Yeah, as everyone else was, not by the fact that Trump agreed to the meeting. If you remember last year, he was asked at some press conference if he would go to such a meeting if the opportunity arose. He said yes, he would. If there was a point to the meeting, he would accept it. So it's not, his acceptance is not necessarily new. What's totally surprising is what's coming from North Korea, because over the past, 8 weeks, you have a complete changeover of tone. Back in December, they were still firing missiles, whether they were intercontinental or intermediate range. Then there was the Olympics. There was Kim Jong-un's sister going down to South Korea. And all of a sudden, we have a complete thaw of relationship with the US.
How do you explain it? How do you explain this thaw?
How do I explain it? Honestly, I don't know enough about what's going on inside North Korea to tell you the real answer. But obviously, whatever Trump is doing is working. Whether we like it or not, fire and fury, shock and awe, whatever you want to name it, but that attitude of saying we're going to take no nonsense for those guys and we'll go further than you if you keep going in that direction, maybe is having a result. You can only judge by the results. And no U.S. president has been able to achieve so much. Since, 20 years?
He hasn't actually achieved anything yet.
No, but there's a meeting.
And, which is something that every North Korean dictator has wanted and tried desperately to get. And now, who's the one who gets it? The one who has intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons. He's the one who gets it.
So is Trump wrong to take the meeting?
Well, a lot of people think he is wrong to take the meeting. I think it's still better to talk than to talk reasonably than to talk about fire and fury. Absolutely, good. But the risk is that the meeting will go nowhere, because what is it that Kim wants out of this? He'll talk about denuclearization, but that will mean that probably they will talk about confidence-building measures. He won't test anymore. He won't shoot any more missiles for a while. But why is he doing that? Because just a few months ago, he announced, we did it. We figured it out. We've got the bombs. We've got the missiles. We can hit America.
Is it sure? Didn't a lot of those missiles fail?
Well, a lot of them succeeded, too. Enough succeeded for him to have the kind of deterrence that he thinks he needs. To deal how? To deal as an equal. The weird little leader, rocket man leader of this hermit kingdom, is dealing with the leader of the United States of America, one-on-one, face-to-face, as an equal.
But what's the alternative? I mean, obviously, if there's going to be talks between them, it's going to be between the leaders of the country.
I'm not saying don't talk. I'm saying what can you expect to achieve out of that? Can Trump back down on his insistence on denuclearization? No. And what happens when Kim says, by the way, if we really want to have peace on the Korean Peninsula, you're going to have to get rid of those 28,000 American troops that are there
that's going to be
and the treaty that's there.
Obviously, the talks are going to be impossible because of what both sides want. However, where we do have a change is that until Trump, the U.S. was on a line of what we would call containment. And they didn't mind what was happening in North Korea as long as he was not threatening anyone beyond his immediate border. And we've changed tack. Now we're on the ground, or we're discussing actually denuclearization. So it's only the start, but I think it's a very positive move. And I don't see how you can interpret it any other way.
Yeah, I think this is one issue where I would actually give Trump a little bit of credit. I mean, I think that everyone was horrified by his bellicose tweets, but
yeah,
it's just
I think we have to give.
It might not have been such a bad.
I think the interesting thing about his bellicosity is how that played with China, because China is really the country that turned the screws on North Korea. To the extent that North Korea is suffering, and it does seem to be suffering from the sanctions, it's because of China.
Alexis Poulain, Donald Trump, he's got this isolationist streak. Could there be some kind of middle ground where perhaps he does draw down some of those nearly 30,000 troops on the Korean Peninsula that the United States has?
Maybe some. I mean, there might be some talks, but it won't be the amount asked by the North Korean. I think clearly there might be also the North Korea running out of Chinese money for sustaining this kind of, we got the missiles and we're not sure they're working. So the talks, they're not just about the US and North Korea, it's really about the US and China and Russia saying, okay, North Korea is no more the hotspot. We should move on to where is the real hotspot, and it's going to be Middle East again.
And that's triggering jitters in Tokyo.
Yeah,
the Japanese are nervous about all of this.
The Japanese are looking very closely because it's the Chinese Sea that is the main issue here. And if the U.S. troops are leaving, then it leaves the Japanese very isolated. Also, they want to have a new army, and they're also buying a lot of weapons. Yet, it's a big question mark about this.
The reaction of the leader of South Korea, Moon Jae-in, quote, the May meeting will be recorded as a historic milestone that realized peace on the Korean Peninsula. Your
well, there have been tensions between the South Koreans, who have always pushed for a more diplomatic, softer approach to resolving the problem, and Trump, who was going his own way with his tweets. But I mean, whether it will turn out to have been a successful good cop, bad cop routine, who knows? But, I mean, obviously, I think the South Koreans would be the last people who would be opposed to this meeting.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you can talk just about the South Koreans. The Moon Jae-in comes from a part of the political spectrum that's very, in South Korean terms, far to the left and very
dovish,
very dovish. Until a year ago, this would have seemed inconceivable. But when he came in after the Candlelight Revolution, he basically said, I'm going to follow the precepts of some of his predecessors who wanted dialogue, who wanted to push for closer relations with North Korea, and who didn't actually achieve much in the end. But that's what he's trying to do.
Speaking of Trump and his pronouncements, if trade wars are easy to win, as he says, well, we may soon be about to find out. The U.S. president signing on for tariffs on imported aluminum and steel. They're due to go to an effect in 2 weeks' time. He's keeping Canada and Mexico off the list, but only if they negotiate better terms for Trump on the North American Free Trade Agreement. Australia seems to be viewed benevolently. Europe, well, less so.
By placing tariffs, the European Union has been particularly tough on the United States. They make it almost impossible for us to do business with them, and yet they send their cars and everything else back into the United States. And they can do whatever they'd like, but if they do that, then we put a big tax of 25% on their cars, and believe me, they won't be doing it very long.
They won't be doing it very long, Gregory Viscusi.
This self-pity Americans have about trade is just something that drives me nuts. I mean, I have never, ever met anyone who's been negotiated a trade deal with the U.S. who thought they got a good deal. I mean, the Americans fight very hard on trade deals. America is not more free trade than the other main trading blocs in the world. If it has a trade deficit, it's because it spends more than it earns. It's just like, it's got nothing to do with trade deals. There's this self-pity when Americans talk about trade. It's not just Trump. I mean, you'll even find in the mainstream American press, I've read complete rubbish in the New York Times about trade. trying to pretend that European value-added tax being higher than American sales tax is some kind of trade impediment. I mean, there's a massive economic illiteracy on this issue, and there's just this self-pity that runs through American views of trade, and he's playing on it. I mean, I think a lot of Americans actually believe it's true what he said.
On Thursday, ahead of the announcement, Jean-Olivier, he singled out Germany again.
Yeah, he should have said Germany on that quote you had, because
he said, hey, how come they don't pay enough when it comes to the military budget of NATO?
Yeah, that's something he said during the campaign as well. No, but the funny thing about cars, just to talk about cars very briefly, you can go to the U.S. You won't see very many Peugeots and Renaults. You see a lot of BMWs and Mercedes. So some of them already built there.
And some of the BMWs you see in Europe,
those are German.
Some of your BMWs in Europe are built in American.
There's no such thing as a European car. Cars are still made by independent nations, kind of. But no, this is an interesting issue, because this is actually a campaign promise, and this is the final of the Big Four campaign promise. If you remember, during the campaign, he said tax reform. He would build his economic strategy around 4 pillars. Tax reform. He did that in December. Deregulation. He's been doing that ever since he got into the White House with Mr. Scott Pruitt at EPA.
The wall.
Energy. The wall, not yet. No. Just talking about economy. But energy, and going back to fossil fuels and opening new explorations and saying okay to pipelines and so forth. The number 4 pillar was trade disputes and having more fair deals with the U.S. So this was expected. Now, what's surprising about this is that China was the big guilty guy. It was really the great imbalance in trade with China that was triggering all those thoughts. And China is not really concerned by steel, or not directly. We were talking about that just before the show.
Because we've already taken measures against their dumping,
there are measures against China,
capacity.
and it's not one of the major exporters of steel to the U.S. So the wonder is, why is he doing this again? And I think it's some more of Trump gesticulations. He's just saying, I'll go as far as I said I would if you don't behave better towards me, and maybe he's going to get a deal. Maybe this is all about NAFTA. Maybe because they are renegotiating NAFTA right now between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S., and they're just about to finalize the deal. And the fact that they got exemptions obviously has to do with that negotiation.
Yeah. All right, it might be all about NAFTA, as you say, but what's going to be the reaction from Europe? How united will the Europeans be? The Germans say they want to see a united reaction. The vice president of the European Commission saying he won't accept Trump cherry-picking who's naughty and who's nice and who gets to slapped with a tariff.
They already reacted very swiftly, saying, if it's this, then it's that, and talking about product, not about steel, but Harley Davidson and whiskey.
Yeah, the threat to
Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan.
Tariffs on things like Harley Davidson motorcycles, peanut butter,
we're talking about
bourbon.
Yeah,
bourbon made in Mitch McConnell's
not what makes the economy running. And even with the steel, it's very peculiar that he choose aluminium and steel, where now we're looking at cobalt and batteries and, the thing that makes mobile phones. So it's...
He's never been one for the latest technology.
Of course not, but it's clearly something about the position on saying, okay, America's first, MAGA, and we're going to negotiate, and I'm the biggest negotiator for this. But clearly the issue is not here. What the trade war will be on next will be on the rare earth, on anything that the Chinese are actually buying and that will be on the market for a higher price. This is the old world, I would say.
Steel is important.
It is, but if you look at the amount of tariffs, the way it's going to rise up in the U.S., it's not going to be much of impact for the market in the U.S. because tariffs are so low already.
Yeah, true. But what's interesting, yesterday in the announcement, he used the word, he's protecting the American worker. He's protecting American jobs. So it's really protectionism.
Yeah,
and the fact is, he wants there to be a U.S. steel industry, which there has been for the past 150 years. Steel is used for buildings, steel is used for bridges, steel is used for planes, steel is used for weapons. Trump wants to spend $1.5 trillion on U.S. infrastructures. He wants that investment to benefit U.S. companies and U.S. workers. So he's doing what he's doing. It's very much in line with everything he's said before. And the only reason I can find behind steel is not so much China, but the idea that our investment should benefit us first and foremost.
Yeah, there is a domestic context, not everybody unhappy, but U.S. Steel this week announcing that it's going to be firing up an idle plant it has in Illinois. There you see images of that plant in Granite City, a one-time giant to the New York Stock Exchange, now the shell of its former self, U.S. Steel. The United States, by the way, pales behind China, the EU, Japan, and India when it comes to steel production. There are the numbers on production. And the steel that you get in things like cars in the United States, well, most of it comes from just across the border in Canada, followed by South Korea. Those are the numbers there. Trump may have a lot of things wrong, but has he understood one thing, which is electoral politics on this one?
Well, maybe. First of all, I'm not sure lots and lots of Americans are dying to get jobs in what's already a pretty tight job market, are dying to get jobs in steel mills. I'm not sure that's the case. And I think that there's a lot of discussion in the United States about a specific race which is taking place this year in the 18th District of Pennsylvania, which is around Pittsburgh. And the assumption, even from pundits you hear in Washington, is that, oh, it's around Pittsburgh. They must be all in favor of the steel industry, and that must be a big thing for them. Well, if you look at the demographics of the 18th District, you see nobody works in industrial jobs there, and it's only got 4.2% unemployment. So unless there's a lot of nostalgia for working in steel mills, that's not going to be a big play for him. What people do like about Trump, and you see it again and again, is just the macho posturing. It's we're going to stand up to the rest of the world. It's make America great again.
And there was a lot of that at that signing ceremony with those steel workers.
And he can be completely incoherent. He was completely incoherent on cars. He's talking about tariffs on steel, and he switches to cars. Well, BMWs, where are they made in America? They're made in Spartanburg, South Carolina. You know, they're not made in Munich.
They're not really.
And they might be made with imported steel, but then they're exported to other countries at a much higher margin than that steel that comes in. And that's the same for the aerospace industry, same for the defense industry.
He can't stand up to the rest of the world and make America great again unless he makes some big symbolic gestures, and this is a big symbolic gesture.
But when you talk about votes, I mean, there's just many, many more jobs that rely on imported steel than rely on making steel.
And what I love is that he doesn't even mention the countries that will really get screwed. Brazil will be the country that gets screwed the worst in this. And we don't even hear Brazil mentioned.
Or South Korea, who theoretically we need to be working with on the subject.
Well, and even though, as you said, China is not a major steel exporter to the United States for all kinds of reasons, China has been vilified constantly in this whole discussion. So,
all right, and we're just one more last point on this, which is the political fallout within Trump's own party. We'll talk about it when we come back. You're watching The World This Week.
You want to speak some?
Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us as well. Gregory Viscusi, journalist at Bloomberg News. Alexis Poulain, co-founder of The Modern World, the publication, not the song by The Jam. And
I love it.
You're giving away your age.
And Gerald Olivier, columnist at Atlantico.fr. Steel is steel, said Donald Trump. If you have no steel, you have no country. We were talking about this just before the break. Gerald Olivier, it's interesting because he employed this clause, this obscure clause that says that it's a question of national security. The French in the past have done that quite a bit to block deals in things like banking and computers.
Yeah, but there are economists here, but some people do believe that states should retain control over some elements of their economy, that not everything should be private. And obviously, steel, I mentioned earlier, was used for weapons. And there is this great discussion right now that if the army was to put in all the program that it needs for new weapons, they wouldn't be able to do it because the U.S. wouldn't be able to provide the steel. And the U.S. Army would find itself dependent on imported steel to do that.
I thought the military uses just like 3% of the steel produced in America.
Well, whatever the real numbers are, that's the excuse that's being used. So you can always claim whether it's real or not. But it's true that steel is connected to national security.
Now, it seems, Christopher Dickey, that the Republican Party has turned against Donald Trump on this one. There was the spectacular resignation of his chief economic advisor, Gary Cohn, this week. What does it mean for Trump? What does it mean for his White House?
That Cohn resigned? Well, I think it's just, once again, a feeling that adults are abandoning the ship. Not rats, but adults. And I think that always is disconcerting in this White House, because you look at this president, and he does do all kinds of irrational things, and he does things that strike people as being very strange, apparently especially people close to him. And when somebody like Cohn, whatever you think of his policies or his orientation, takes a walk, it's important. It would be more important, perhaps, if Jim Mattis took a walk from the Defense Department, or H.R. McMaster took a walk as National Security Advisor, because that really is a question of war. But this is a question of trade wars, and Cohn walked.
A few weeks ago, Chris, on this show, you said, wait a minute, the economy's doing well. The populist rhetoric plays well with his core base. He could do very well. Do you still feel that way now when you see the Republican Party?
I think when I said that, that's the day the stock market crashed by several hundred points. But just coincidentally. But no, I think that's still true. I think that the tax
so
cuts,
he can win without those grown-ups that you mentioned.
Yeah, isn't that a scary prospect? But I mean, I think he can. I think that the Republicans have gotten a lot that they wanted. The holy grail for them was this massive tax cut. And it will pay off in the sense that a lot of people will get a few hundred or a couple of $1,000s until the bills kick in, which will be in about 4 or 5 years. And when that happens, he will have been reelected already.
Yeah, if I may, it's true. It's a very divisive move. It divides the White House. It also divides the Republican Party. Now, Gary Cohn had said that he would leave if those tariffs went through. So his move is not surprising, and he had announced it. However, ever since the start, there's been a division within the White House between, let's say, the free traders and the more protectionist or nationalistic. Now, Wilbur Ross, it's too old to be a child, but Wilbur Ross and Peter Lighthizer, Robert Lighthizer and Peter Navarro, all these people are on the side of protectionism. They were on the side of tariffs, and that's the winning team at the moment. All right, we'll see whatever happens. Republicans in Congress are very divided. Ryan is against that move, and he's not the only one. But to go back to the political side briefly, you mentioned it might be connected to a coming election in Pennsylvania. I think this might be connected to the great midterm election coming in November. And indeed, Trump and the Republicans might do very well. It's very unusual for the party who's in the White House to do well in midterms election. But considering how the economy is doing, considering that Trump has fulfilled his main campaign promises, he's going to go on that campaign trail and say, I do what I say. You can trust me. Things are going well. Stick with it.
Speaking of elections, a classic case of kick out the bums in Italy, but with voters making unconventional choices. Italy's president yet to ask a party to form the next government after last Sunday's vote. In a general election where the anti-establishment Five-Star Movement got the most votes, its 31-year-old leader, Luigi Di Maio, well short of the 40% threshold he'd need to govern outright. Gregory Viscusi, the vote redrawing Italy's political landscape. We can look at the map there, squeezing out the center-left, splitting the country in two, with Five-Star in the south and the far-right League in the north. You were there Sunday for the vote. Is there the feeling that Italy is divided, split?
Italy's certainly divided, and the thing is that it's divided three ways, because the center-left did very badly, and as you see, they've lost a lot of their strongholds, but they still hold the balance of power. No one got anywhere near a majority, so there's three blocks, and it's very hard to see how any of them can work together. It's just almost impossible to imagine, partly because Five-Star has said that they refuse to do the old game, the old normal parliamentary game, which is that you offer a few cabinet positions to another party and they sign on and then you get a majority. So they say they're not going to do this, because that's the old way of doing it.
And we're still asking the question, who is the Five-Star? Because at first they were this sort of trying to be young and modern. Then they had this right turn in a lot of their rhetoric, most notably when it comes to to the migrant crisis.
They backed off and over. They moderated the image so much. They all moderated their image so much during the election on questions like migrants, on questions like Europe, that it's very hard now to know what they stand for. And you can't really see them in the way of a traditional old European party with a party platform and the leader. They were sort of this internet-based movement, so it's about the base voting. So it's not really about their positions anyway.
There's a very interesting poll saying that 35% of the people who voted for the Communist Party back in the 80s are now voting for 5 Star.
Yeah, I see them more as coming from the left and the right.
But they do. I mean, it's very difficult to understand because they are the uber populists. So they take anything that works and it goes like, okay, let's make this movement and say we don't want any more of these old politicians. And they've been helped by Berlusconi, who came back in the game.
But before they were saying we're not going to do a coalition with anyone. Now they're not saying that anymore.
Well, they said. I mean, they said we'll do a coalition that you can vote for us, but we're not going to offer you any seats. Well, that's not how it works.
Yeah, well, you'll see in the coming weeks they'll have to discuss. I mean, when you do a score like this, you have to do something out of it. They are the first party now in terms of votes in these elections. And the rules have changed last year after 2 years of debate on how to be elected with the majority and to help the Democratic Party of Renzi to still stay afloat.
So do you think they'll do a deal?
Yeah, I don't have a ball, but I think with a score like this, it would be very disappointing for the people who have voted for them to say that, okay, screw this, we'll just have a parliamentary group and don't do anything out of it.
I think the only grouping that makes any sense would be 5 Star and the Democrat Party.
Yes.
So that's the only that makes any sense. Because
otherwise, they won't go with
Lega. Salvini on the League who insisted he has to be the candidate for the center-right coalition. He's, his own ally Berlusconi called him a pyromaniac, and he is a pyromaniac.
Let's talk about that now. Matteo Salvini, the top vote getter inside of the center-right coalition, which gives the former northern separatists first dibs on forming a government inside that coalition, if that coalition is called upon. We're talking, though, about a man who in the past has called the euro a crime against humanity and whose party sits with France's far-right National Front in the European Parliament. Thus, enter, this week, a familiar face.
Sono felice per Matteo Salvini. Sono felice per la Lega.
I am happy for Matteo Salvini. I am happy for the League, with whom we have been in government for many years and who we have been working together with for many years. I confirm that in respect to our allies, in respect to our pacts, I remain Forza Italia's leader. I will be the coordinator of the centre-right. I will be the guarantor for unity in the coalition.
I will be the guarantor. After the polls closed Sunday, we were wondering, is this the swan song of Silvio Berlusconi? I guess that's our answer. He's not going away.
Oh, well, he's not going away, but that doesn't mean that he's going to be the guarantor of anything or that he's going to run the coalition the way he's talking about it. And I think it was always kind of as weird as Berlusconi is, and he gets weirder even with age. It's always difficult to see him in a kind of a coalition arrangement with the Liga, where the Liga is dominant. As long as the Liga was secondary, a relatively minor player, he could play that game. But with somebody like Salvini, who really is, Italy was the birthplace of fascism. Well, this is a resurgence of fascism.
Yes.
Salvini and Meloni, also another figure in the.
But she's much softer than he is. I mean,
But in any case, it is a resurgence of classical fascism, except that classical fascism wasn't even as racist as these guys are. And I think that's a very uncomfortable marriage for Berlusconi.
Yeah, I mean, he's not being totally honest there. I mean, he obviously thought that he was going to be the number one go-getter on that side. And these guys disagree on so many things. They disagree on Europe. There's so much that they disagree on, Salvini and Berlusconi, that...
Well, and Berlusconi said some silly things. I mean, Salvini talked about deporting 100,000 Africans, and Berlusconi came out and said, "Oh, I'll deport 600,000." Well,
that quote got a bit turned around. He really didn't. He did not say he was going to deport 600,000 people. He said there's 600,000 people in Italy who are not refugees. It's a time bomb. We have to humanely work out a way to solve this. He didn't say I'm going to deport 600,000. That was a bit bit unfair.
Well, I'm sure.
Let me get your reaction to something here. Silvio Berlusconi, who at 81 still wants to hang around. Matteo Renzi, the leader of the center-left, who took a thumping. His party got 19% of the vote. He comes up says he's going to resign, but he's not going to resign yet. He's going to resign afterwards, once the coalition's been settled, once there's been primaries inside of his party, and he's still going to keep his Senate seat. What does that tell you, that the leaders of the center left and the center right just aren't going away?
Well, yeah, and that's also Italy. You have to make a coalition, and it's never easy, and it never lasts very long. But there's a very clear message behind the five-star movement, I think. I mean, there's two messages in that election. One which is really anti-Europe, and the other which is really anti-Europe and anti-immigration. And there is another one very much anti-establishment, anti-old way of doing politics. And the worst possible thing is that on the night of that election, I would say the two losers, which are Renzi and Berlusconi, because he expected to be much higher than he was, they come out saying, oh, we're sticking around and we're in charge and we're going to be the guarantor. And that's probably what the electors...
How come they don't fall on their sword in Italy the way they do, like in England or in Britain when you lose an election?
It's like in France. I mean, it's cultural. It's like you can be convicted, like Berlusconi is not able to stand for election, but he was there in the campaign. He's not, he can be elected only next year. But he's been running for the campaign. It's cultural. France is like that. I mean, you can be blamed for the Me Too movement, but it's okay. You'll be reintegrated. It's like, and Italy, clearly the five-star movement vote was to say, enough of this. We want a new world, a new republic. The old stance was the Third Republic.
But the problem with the five-star
they won't get it.
Is it also doesn't tell you how they're going to govern, as you were saying earlier. You have no idea.
To get something.
How did the five-star build its initial base? Holding rallies that were Vaffanculo rallies, right? Up yours rallies. And that's the spirit of the party to this day. But that doesn't tell you how they're going to run anything.
The Di Maio's tried to make it look more responsible, make him, moderate the image. But he's not brought in any experience or competence, and around him.
And they got two cities already where they got
totally
Myers, and the vote in the cities for five-star was not that high compared to the rest of Italy.
The Democratic Party won the center of Rome and it won Turin, which are the two cities that are
Turin and Rome. And because it's good to be in the opposition. But governing is very difficult. You got the power fatigue.
But as far as Berlusconi, Forza Italia is his creation. So, when he goes, Renzi's a different thing. The Democrat Party is a much older traditional party. He should go, and there are other people in the party who can take over. There's no one in Forza Italia. It's been for 20 years. It's been 30 years. It's just been a personality vehicle for Berlusconi.
Yeah.
And there's a big question of what's going to happen in this vacuum on the center right when he goes.
A few years back, it was Alexander Litvinenko drinking poisoned tea in London. Now, Britain's got another poisoned ex-Russian spy in its hand. Sunday's attack on 66-year-old Sergei Skripal and his daughter in Salisbury has Scotland Yard scrambling for an antidote. The two in critical condition, while one of the policemen who tended to them is in serious condition. Russia denies any involvement. And the Home Secretary warns against jumping to conclusions while the investigation continues. Amber Rudd visiting with that policeman who is in stable condition, along with 21 people in total have been contaminated. They've brought in for the military now, including chemical warfare experts. Russia, again, denies, but it's got a funny way of telling the story on Channel 1 television.
I have a warning for anyone who dreams of such a career. The profession of a traitor is one of the most dangerous in the world. According to the statistics, it's much more dangerous than that of a drug career. It's very rare that those who choose it live in peace until a ripe old age. Alcoholism, drug addiction, stress and depression are inevitable professional illnesses for a traitor, resulting in heart attacks and even suicide.
Инфаркты, инсульты, дорожно-транспортные происшествия, самоубийство, наконец.
Christopher Dickey.
Look, this is a game as old as terrorist and assassination politics. You kill somebody, or you try to kill somebody in this case, and the whole idea is that they know who did it, the people around them know who did it, everybody knows who did it, you deny it, but the game is, you know I know, and I know you know, and we'll just go on that basis because you can't and won't do a damn thing. And that's exactly what they learned with the Litvinenko case, where they murdered this guy with polonium-210, which is a horrible death. And when they finally figured out what it was, what did Britain do? Oh, yes, they launched an investigation. He died in 2006. They finished the investigation in 2016. and decided that probably Vladimir Putin was behind it, but who can say? So, of course, Vladimir Putin feels now that if he's got a traitor like Skripal, he can kill him. The question is timing. Why now?
9 days before we're 9 days before his.
We are now. It was 2 weeks. He was poisoned 2 weeks before
probable re-election.
The certain re-election of Vladimir Putin in Russia. But what does he want? He wants a massive turnout, basically to obviate or to negate the calls for abstention there. But he also wants this huge endorsement of his tough guy stance. So he did two things that drew a lot of international attention. One, he brandished his nuclear weapons. Yeah. He showed videos of his new nukes that nobody can stop. Nobody can stop our nukes. And where are they landing? They're landing on Florida in the video that he showed. And I presume, I think it's a safe presumption, he tried to kill this guy. And we see this kind of broadcast, but not only from this guy on that broadcast. There was all over Russian television and radio. One of the men accused of killing, there's really no doubt about it, of poisoning Litvinenko in 2006.
Has been granting interviews.
Well, not only did he grant interviews, he said exactly the same sort of thing. You never know what's going to happen to these traitors, and played this game. So, I mean, really, the whole idea that Britain now is saying, oh, we have to be really
So what should Britain do?
We can't
What
say.
should Britain do?
Well, I think, first of all, they do need to pursue, in the most reasonable Anglo-Saxon fashion, the investigation here. But they've already hit a roadblock. They know it was some kind of nerve agent, but it's not a nerve agent they've ever seen. And they were able to get it to Portendown, which is their main laboratory, looking at these things pretty quickly because that's only 7 miles away from where this guy fell ill. So they look at it and they say, this is a nerve agent. What could it be? And there's concerns that it's a nerve agent, actually, that the Russians have been working on that's more or less undetectable, which would be a very dangerous new weapon of mass destruction.
Gérald Olivier, what should the British do?
Well, pretty much what Christopher is suggesting, but it's a situation where it's really hard to have some form of reprisal. You can't have sanctions because nothing is official. Even if you know it's all done by the secret services, you can't go to the UN and complain. You don't really have a channel to do that unless there is some kind of back channel and a way for the British to put pressure on the SVR or any other service, which is rather doubtful because they don't quite work the same way. So this is something that they become victim of. A lot of so-called traitors, whatever they are, but a lot of Russians like London, and so they get killed in London because they get pursued by their own services, and there's little the British can do. Instead, maybe telling them, don't come to London anymore, and maybe you'll get killed somewhere else.
Well, the British are reopening 14 cases of people who hung themselves, but maybe they didn't hang themselves, of people who fell out of windows onto spiked fences.
But you were very good in your explanation. We know they did it. They know we know, and there's nothing we can do if the we goes from this side.
That's the game.
But I quite agree.
Sort of like the American elections.
By the way, in the interest of balance, he's not always a tough guy, Vladimir Putin. Ahead of his March 18th re-election bid, the Russian president in campaign mode on Thursday. It was International Women's Day. The chance for Putin to read a poem.
Я знаю, что все женщины прекрасны. И красотой своей, и умом, еще весельем, если в доме праздник, и верностью, когда разлука в нем.
All right, yeah, they're reading a poem to the women of Russia. What's going to be the lesson of this election?
Wow. Well, he'll be re-elected, and the question is how many people will turn out, and what will be the figures, is 99% or 98% or less, of course. But this whole stage setting of, Russia is big, it's making Russia great again. It's like the same as Trump in many ways. Only Vladimir Putin is talking to the woman of the country with poem, which is quite different. And the killing of spies has been, as we said, business as usual for many years for any nation in the world. So there's nothing really to be done apart from the families to try to have the case run and arrest maybe some guy, but it will never happen. So one thing is sure in this world is that Putin will be re-elected. So we can count on him for having the same line on Russia, so the link with Iran, and maybe a resolution on Syria, which is good news. You never know. But that's the only thing that we're sure of, is Putin.
The only thing we can be sure of.
We're talking about women, just one bit of trivia I hadn't understood. I didn't realize that International Women's Day was originally a Soviet holiday.
Yeah, it's a national holiday in Russia.
Yeah. And people like it.
It's the only country, actually, that uses a holiday. Yeah.
Alexis Poulain, Christopher Dickey. I also want to thank Gérard Olivier and Gregory Viscusi. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Sean James.
Hello. Hi there.
So we're wondering where this meeting could take place between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. No word on that yet. One of the questions, though, is that, of course, it is the front page story almost everywhere.
Almost everywhere. There's one place where the news of this proposed summit has not hit yet, and that is in North Korea. So the media there is entirely state-controlled, as most people know, and the evening news there came and went without any sort of mention of this, which some people might think is strange. And Alistair Coleman, who's an expert in North Korea at the BBC, has a couple of reasons why he thinks this is. He says, number one, it takes usually a couple days for North Korea to fully fire up the propaganda machine to see how they're going to handle this. Number two is just a couple days ago, they were calling Donald Trump an idiot in state media. And so if they immediately turned around and said, oh, now we're going to meet with him, it might be a little jarring for the public. So he expects that once all this propaganda gets started, they're going to say this is about North Korean goodwill. This has nothing to do with sanctions, of course, but the meeting is about the brilliance and power of Kim.
And also making news is a documentary movie that was filmed, produced by Pyongyang?
Right. So it's a propaganda film, and people online are starting to notice some similarities in the plot of this propaganda film called The Country I Saw, and what's happening right now. So that was a 5-part series that was produced by North Korea to justify the pursuit of nuclear weapons to the domestic audience. And in it, in short, North Korea performs a series of nuclear tests, and that forces the international community, specifically the Americans, to engage with North Korea. In the movie, they send former President Bill Clinton to North Korea to meet with Kim Jong-un's dad, Kim Jong-il, the leader before, and treats them as equals. So Jeffrey Lewis, who is an arms control expert, tweeted saying, the situation is literally how the North Korean film The Country I Saw ends. An American president visits Pyongyang, compelled by North Korea's nuclear and missile programs to treat Kim as an equal.
Life imitating fiction. And a North Korea story would not be complete without eccentric former NBA star Dennis Rodman.
That's right. So Dennis Rodman, former NBA star, is probably the only person on earth who can say Trump and Un are both his friends. He was on The Celebrity Apprentice, Donald Trump's reality show, as a contestant, and he's traveled to North Korea several times and met with Kim a couple of times, one of the few Americans to meet with him. So he actually has some place to speak on this topic, which is interesting. But he came out, so after the announcement yesterday, he came out praising President Trump, saying, well done, you're on the way to a historical meeting no U.S. president has ever done. And he says that he looks forward to returning to North Korea himself for some more basketball diplomacy. He posted this on his Twitter today, along with a clip of him on CNN saying that he had called for this to happen years ago. And interestingly enough, he had said before that Trump wanted to come, long before he was president, or years before he was president, Trump had wanted to join Rodman on one of his trips to North Korea and had expressed an interest and then eventually pulled out from that trip. At the time, people have dug up this tweet from the American president, because there's always a tweet for everything, saying, crazy Dennis Rodman is saying I wanted to go to North Korea with him. Never discussed, no interest, last place on earth I want to go. So but he might be going. We're not sure. We're going to see in the next
We'll see
couple
where
of
that meeting
months.
takes place. Many thanks to Charlene James. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.